You rely on this podcast to stay informed and connected with your local community, and we rely on you. Without listener support, this show simply wouldn't exist. Be a part of the team that makes this show possible by donating to our home, KUOW. It only takes a minute. Donate at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thank you.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. And Washington voters, you may already have your mail-in ballot for the August 6th primary election. And when you actually crack that envelope open, you'll see there are 28 people vying for governor of the Evergreen State. To keep things simple this week on Soundside, I'm talking to the top 4 candidates in terms of polling and fundraising. And leading that pack so far is Washington State's Attorney General Bob Ferguson. Ferguson is a Democrat. He was first elected Attorney General in 2012, and before that, he was a King County Councilmember, and he joins me now. Hi, Bob Ferguson. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, this has been a pretty tumultuous few weeks in politics, actually. Mm-hmm. I think Washington voters are just going to be cluing into this race as they're getting their ballots, trying to focus on local issues, but also keeping the national stuff in mind. So for folks who may, for whatever reason, not be familiar with your work as Attorney General, can you give us the elevator pitch for why you would be the best governor of Washington State? And let's keep it kind of, again, the Cliff's Notes version.
Of course. I'll keep it brief, but thanks again for having me. So, in a nutshell, what I would say as Attorney General, I think we've had a strong record in my office of standing up for the rights and freedoms of all Washingtonians, holding powerful interests accountable when they don't play by the rules, and making sure we're centering the people in all the work that we do. I'm proud of that work and that record as Attorney General. And looking to run for governor, I think the next governor has a whole set of challenges ahead of us. We'll be talking about some of those issues. And the key is to lean into those challenges. I've never been a status quo guy. I transformed the AG's office to better serve the people, to create a civil rights division, to create an environmental enforcement division, to take on the Trump administration 99 times. So we changed the way we do business in the AG's office. And frankly, the state needs to change how we do business to better serve the people, to address challenges we have related to climate, to our ferry service, homelessness, the issues I suspect we'll be talking about, but to do so in a way that still protects fundamental freedoms like reproductive rights, protecting our environment, and core freedoms that we as Washingtonians really value. And I think that's why I offer in this race, in contrast to my main opponent, Dave Reichert, and look forward to talking about some of those contrasts and those issues as well.
Yeah, let's get into it with the plan that you have put forward for police hiring in the state. Your plan includes offering grants for jurisdictions to increase signing bonuses. Your opponent, whom I just spoke with, former Representative Dave Reichert, former sheriff, he said that throwing money at the issue doesn't necessarily mean that more police officers will join forces around the state. He contends that there is a culture problem here in Washington, that we have policies and rhetoric from our elected officials that repel police officers. Reichert brings up how some in the state legislature have tried to drop qualified immunity as an example of this. It hasn't been successful. Do you think that the relationship between state leadership and police departments and the rank and file officers needs to change? And how would you, if you do think that there needs to be a change, make that change?
Yeah, well, I would say is I find it fascinating that Congressman Reichert does not support increasing pay for hardworking public servants like law enforcement officers.
Well, I don't know if he said that, but he criticized your plan as just throwing money at it. Yeah.
Well, I can assure you he has criticized it. He has said he opposes it many, many times. We have him on audio multiple times criticizing that specific plan that I have, that frankly other governors around the country have had, where they create a fund in their state budget that local jurisdictions can draw upon for hiring bonuses or increase salaries to attract law enforcement. Look, Washington State ranks 50th last per capita on number of law enforcement officers we have. Look, I think we need to get creative about how to attract those law enforcement officers to serve our communities, keep us safe, reduce the waits for call times if someone's in a crisis or facing an emergency situation, to have law enforcement be there to help them out. And he opposes that. I want to be very clear about that. And I'm proud that as Attorney General, we have a criminal division. Obviously, as you know and your listeners know, if there's a felony, your local prosecutor handles those cases, right? But the AG's office has a small criminal division where those prosecutors can turn to my team if they can't bring a case for some reason. There's a conflict or they lack the resources. It's a small county, let's say. And I'm proud of the work we've done working with literally every prosecutor across the state when they ask us to take on those most challenging cases. So from my perspective as Attorney General, we've worked very closely with prosecutors, with sheriffs, with law enforcement officers all across the state. And I think that relationship is important. And as a governor and as an attorney general, valuing that service is going to be important to continuing that relationship. And as always, with any relationship, with any public servants, to improve that relationship as well.
Homelessness has steadily increased in Washington state since 2016. The state has put billions into housing and homelessness programs over the last couple budget cycles. Some of that came from federal COVID aid as well. Governor Inslee and the legislature have really focused the last few years in trying to get a handle on this issue by moving people camped in right-of-ways into housing and providing wraparound services where possible. But homelessness continues to be a persistent and increasing problem. One of your opponents, again, we're talking to Dave Reichert here, he says he wants an audit of how all this money is being spent, suggesting that there are inefficiencies in the system. What is your position on how much we spend right now on homelessness? Is it enough? Is it too much? Too little? And what's the plan?
Yeah, what I would say initially is that, and I think I talked at the outset of the challenges we face as a state. And from my perspective, the challenge we have around homelessness is especially challenging because with the unhoused population, you have an intersection of all sorts of very difficult issues, mental health issues, chemical dependency issues, affordability issues, you name it. Those are really tough issues to get your arms around. So, I think the state should always be accountable to how we spend all of our money. That's just basic, but that doesn't really get to the issue of solving that problem. Speaking of Dave Reichert, he has said many times in many interviews that he thinks the homeless, the unhoused, should be sent to McNeil Island. By the way, McNeil Island is where we keep our sexually violent predators. I know that because my team sends sexually violent predators to McNeil Island.
We did talk to him about that. Yeah, we brought that up. He said, what's wrong with finding somewhere to send people, and that he feels like his words were twisted, but we did ask him about that. Yeah.
I encourage folks to Google him. He has had multiple interviews where he's been pressed by reporters to say, are you serious about sending the unhoused to McNeil Island? And he has doubled down on that. So I realize now he's trying to rewrite what he has said in the past, but there are multiple videos of him saying this over and over and over again. He has suggested sending the unhoused on Navy ships, for example. He seems to think Evergreen College is going to close and we should send the homeless there as well. So he has, frankly, bizarre ideas on one of the most critical issues we have. And so no, he does not get away with now somehow saying he's not serious about that. There are multiple videos of him saying that over and over. My point being, this issue is far too serious for someone as unserious as Dave Reichert, who has bizarre ideas on how to handle a challenging issue. My view is, and going back to my King County Council days, I became very involved in making sure we increased revenues that we brought in for the county and allocated on addressing issues like housing, affordable housing, mental health issues, chemical dependency issues. And I've worked as Attorney General, take on some of the largest corporations in the world on the opioid epidemic, bringing back more than $1 billion to help folks who are struggling all across our state, including those who are on the street. So look, I think being transparent with our resources as a state is important for anything we do as a state. But having a focus where the state is partnering with local governments, partnering with the private sector to address this will certainly be a priority if I'm elected governor.
Let's talk about opioid use. In 2021, the Washington Supreme Court ruled that the state's felony drug possession laws the law was unconstitutional. At the time, you called for the state legislature to not reinstate drug penalties. You told KUOW's Amy Radel that you were hoping, quote, the next step is for Washington to change course and move away from a war on drugs that has utterly failed and try a new approach. And that new approach is to eliminate the criminal penalties associated with possessing a non-commercial amount of drugs. Now, Oregon has attempted this. They've rolled it back. It didn't work. Ultimately, the Washington legislature did the gross misdemeanor penalty for drug possession and use, the Blake fix. Do you still support decriminalization?
No, to be clear, for quite some time ago, I supported that, what you referred to, the state legislature taking their action on the Blake fix, on the gross misdemeanors. I supported that time and felt that was appropriate. It's clear when the people in Oregon voted, by a significant number on decriminalization, that was turned out to be a failure for Oregon. I think that's clear. And so I think the legislature took the right step in what you referred to as that Blake fix and supported that as well.
Were you wrong 3 years ago when you said that about decriminalization? Did you feel like that was a mistake?
I think things change and you have to adapt as an elected official to what's changing and seeing what other states are experiencing. And one thing we've leaned into is, in reaching that fix that the legislature reached in I think the last legislative session, one thing many legislators pointed to was a reason they were able to return those the gross misdemeanors as part of that resolution was because my office has recovered $1 billion from these pharmaceutical companies for their role in fueling the opioid epidemic. And those are dollars that can be used for treatment to help folks who are struggling with addiction. So in other words, look, we're not going to criminalize our way out of this problem. That is for sure. We need to make sure that folks have the treatment options to get them to address their addiction and help them resolve that addiction and get off the streets. And that is something that I'm proud of my office, that we've taken on the biggest corporations of the world and beat them. And again, recovered more than $1 billion for the state.
Let's talk about Governor Inslee's signature policy achievement, which you have also said you would support keeping in place. That's the Climate Commitment Act.
Mm-hmm.
It aims to dramatically lower carbon emissions in the state. The act created a carbon allowance market to help make those reductions. But it got off to a rocky start because the prices for carbon allowances really soared higher than expected last year. And while that means more money for climate programs, the revenue, critics also blamed it for higher gas prices. It's tough to nail down exactly how much it has in reality affected gas prices. Now, the CCA is facing an initiative that would essentially kill these carbon auctions. Voters are going to decide on this in November. You have said you support maintaining it. What do you say to people who are thinking about whether they should vote on this initiative? And this is going to be a big motivator, especially for swing voters and conservative voters. What do you say to people who are mad about gas prices and considering voting for this initiative?
Yeah, what I would say is that I think we can address those issues of affordability and gas prices and still address our climate crisis. I don't think those two goals are mutually exclusive. And so I disagree with Congressman Reichert, who opposes the Climate Commitment Act, would throw out the entire act, which brings in significant revenues, hundreds of millions of dollars, as you know, that creates jobs and that addresses climate across our state. He just wants to throw the whole thing out. Look, I think, can that law be improved? You bet. And I encourage folks to go to my website on all the issues we're talking about. We have detailed plans, and I encourage folks to check that out. But I don't think we should throw out the entire Climate Commitment Act. I might also add that Dave Reichert has no plan, has said nothing about how he would fill the budget gap on if that Climate Commitment Act was repealed. I might also add the distinction here with Congressman Reichert gets even more fundamental than the Climate Commitment Act. He has said, there's audio of him when he's speaking to his supporters, when he thinks he's behind closed doors, that humans do not contribute to climate change. Well, it's no wonder he opposes the Climate Commitment Act if he denies the science around climate. We cannot afford to have a governor for the next 4 to 8 years who does not believe that humans contribute to climate. I believe the science. I'm proud of my work during the Trump administration and holding the Trump administration accountable for trying to roll back environmental protections. And I think this is a very, very fundamental difference between myself and Congressman Reichert in this race.
Washington has failed to keep up with building enough housing. The state legislature has tried to fix this, passed bills, including the missing middle housing bill to increase density, but we're still falling short. The goal was 55,000 new units a year. Last year, we fell 18,000 units short. What do we do? What do we do to increase the housing stock?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking about this issue because I'm the only candidate that's been to all 39 counties, campaigned in all 39 counties. And when I speak about that at my events every day, I often mention that the issue I heard the most all across the state was the issue of affordable housing. This comes up all the time. Red jurisdictions, blue jurisdictions, urban, more rural environments. This is a huge issue. And so you're absolutely right to give some sense of scale of how far behind we are, how much work we have to do. Washington State needs to construct 1 million units of new housing in the next 20 years. I put in my voter's guide statement, where you only get about 250 words to outline your entire vision, of course, for the future of the state of Washington. I put in writing in that voter's pamphlet statement that in my first term as governor, we're going to construct 200,000 units of housing of all kinds. The unhoused, affordable housing, market rate, you name it. I think it is possible we can do this because both Republican legislators and Democratic legislators have constituents who want more housing. The business community wants to partner with the state. In my conversations around the state, I've met with Microsoft executives who want to see more housing, and I've met with a restaurant owner in Eastern Washington who says he's had to reduce the number of hours his restaurant is open because his workers can't afford to live near his relatively small town on the other side of the mountains. So it doesn't matter where you work, what kind of business you run, what your situation is in Washington State. We need more affordable housing.
Yeah.
We have a detailed plan around that. One more thing I'll add, I don't want to go on too long.
Okay, because I need to get to one more question before you got to go.
But if I can add just one more thing, which is, because this is a true crisis for Washington State and is really critical to grow our economy, I'm going to pull our housing department out from the Department of Commerce, which is massive, and make the head of housing a cabinet level position. So that person is seeing me every single week and reporting to me on our progress on constructing those 200,000 units of housing of all kinds in my first term.
Republicans and one of your Democratic opponents have been hammering you for this episode back in May with the two other Bob Fergusons who signed up to run for governor. This was kind of a stunt by a conservative activist who recruited these guys with your same name. I mean, their name. They were all Bob Fergusons, and they threw their hats in the ring briefly. They soon dropped out. But in that initial confusion, you took some steps that some people say crossed ethical lines. The Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, says you pressured him in a phone call to reorder the ballot to put your name first, which he says was against the law. Ballot order is random draw. State Senator Mark Mullet, who's also running for governor as a Democrat, filed ethics complaints over this, and he has compared this to a Trumpian-style election interference situation. So, my question, final one, because we gotta run, but did you go too far in this instance?
No. I mean, first, Mark Mullet, who is trailing last time I checked in a poll by 38 points. I mean, look, when you're trailing that far and you're that desperate, you will literally say anything to try and get some attention. Number two, it was not just some stunt, by the way. It was the Republican Party's Volunteer of the Year who recruited two people named Bob Ferguson to file as Democrats to confuse voters. And look, did I converse with Steve Hobbs? Absolutely, in my capacity as a candidate. And does the state law specifically allow for a Secretary of State to take steps in a situation like that to resolve voter confusion? It absolutely does, including reordering names to avoid confusion, including adding information about the different, in this case, Bob Ferguson, so voters know which one is the Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General, and which one is the Bob Ferguson who's not a serious candidate for governor. And so, look, I will not apologize for addressing in strong terms what was clearly more than a stunt, but actually an illegal activity. It is a felony to deceive voters in this way, because at the end of the day, it's disenfranchising voters. And that was the specific outcome that this state Republican Party Volunteer of the Year was. He admitted it. He talked about it. He bragged about it. He said he wished he could have had more Bob Fergusons. And so, look, just to be candid, I'm going to stand up for our democracy. I'm going to stand up against Donald Trump if he's elected again. We need to make sure we're protecting our democracy and avoiding voter confusion. So no, I have no regrets about that. And I'm thankful those two Bob Fergusons, when they realized that conduct was illegal, withdrew their names. So voters can choose between myself and Dave Reichert and understand the contrast, not be confused by their Bob Fergusons on the ballot.
Well, you were efficient in your answers, and we got to most of the issues we were hoping to today, even in a little bit of an abbreviated time. So Bob Ferguson, Attorney General of Washington State, running for governor. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Libby. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.